Welcome to the 2014 Royal Tyrrell Museum Speaker Series. Today, the Royal Tyrrell Museum and its cooperating society are proud to present our very own Mr. Tyler Eddy. Tyler is a project manager and interpretive planner here at the Royal Tyrrell Museum. Tyler is originally from Weyburn in southeastern Saskatchewan and has been living in southern Alberta for the past 15 years. After obtaining his bachelor's degree in ecotourism and outdoor leadership at Medicine Hat College, Tyler joined the Royal Tyrrell Museum Education Department in 2004. In that function, Tyler played an instrumental role in establishing and running the Encana Badlands Science Camp from 2005 through 2007. Subsequently, Tyler was hired as project and interpretive planner at the Royal Tyrrell Museum, and since then has seen to completion numerous projects such as museum exhibits, Alberta's Fossil Trail, and the recent Hoodoo redevelopment, which I've been told is being turned into a Hollywood blockbuster, right? Always interested in new adventures, Tyler has looked towards Argentina as an inspiration for museum development, architecture, and new language opportunities. Argentina can be likened as the southern hemisphere's Alberta, with its rich paleontological heritage and great diversity of dinosaurs. Thus, in 2013, the Royal Tyrrell Museum Cooperating Society agreed to provide financial support for Tyler's trip to Argentina, where he volunteered as project and interpretive planner at the Museo Paleontológico Egidio Feruglio, located in the city of Tyrrell in the Chubut province. The Egidio Feruglio Paleontological Museum is famous for its extensive collection of Mesozoic and Cenozoic vertebrates, particularly dinosaurs, crocodiles, and mammals from Patagonia. Tyler's favorite things in life are family, recreational hockey, and chocolate, all of which he enjoyed during his trip to South America. So today, Tyler will present us with an overview of the grand adventure that he and his family undertook, from the hustle and bustle of Buenos Aires to the fossil-rich Patagonian steppes and the tranquil seashore at the end of the world. So without further delay, I present you Mr. Tyler Eddy.
Thanks. Gracias, Francois, y bienvenidos a todos a Adventura Argentina. And that's the Spanish content for this presentation, and about summarizes all the Spanish that I know. This all started in, about 3 years ago. Kelly and I, my wife, talked about getting away somewhere for an extended period of time and going on a grand adventure. And we didn't do anything about it, we just talked about it for months and months and months. And eventually we started talking about the possibilities and doing some research on places we could go and things that we could do. And then we started stuffing some money into an old hot chocolate tin that we had in our bedroom. And eventually it morphed into the reality of an adventure to Argentina. So we spent 3 months there this past summer, and while you guys were enjoying the rainfall here in the summer, we were enjoying winter in Argentina. Basically, we had 4 objectives by the time our trip had morphed into our departure date, and number 1 was to do a little bit of work in some museums. So we thought, rather than just straight adventure, perhaps there's some opportunity here for some professional development. And we fulfilled that goal. Number 2 was to learn a little bit of Spanish. Number 3 was to play some ice hockey, which should be everybody's objective when they go on a trip. And number 4 was to have a little bit of adventure. And of course, we fulfilled that. A little bit quick. All right, a little bit about Argentina. Argentina is the largest Spanish-speaking country in South America, and most of you probably know that it's down at the southern tip of South America. They've got 5 neighbors. You can see Uruguay and Paraguay labeled on the map. Not labeled up top there is a little bit of border with Brazil, and also the border with Bolivia up there. And then, of course, Argentina's favorite neighbor, Chile, which they share a lot of border with down alongside the Andes Mountains. You can see from the map that the northern part of the country is fairly fertile. This is where a lot of the agriculture occurs. And the brown on this map here represents wind. A lot of wind. And that's where we spent most of our time in Argentina, was down in Patagonia. There's fossils throughout the country, but lots of the concentration is down in the southern area. And each one of these stars represents one of our stops on our trip. We flew into Buenos Aires, the northernmost star, and we sort of zigzagged our way all the way down the country, down to Ushuaia in the bottom area there. And we made several interesting stops along the way. Argentina is a really diverse country. There's a lot of different landscapes as we go throughout. A couple of areas that I'd like you to observe so that you know where we are on our journey a little bit later on. This peninsula area right here, this is where we spent a month working at Museo Egidio Feruglio. As well, observe the Andes Mountains, which run all the way down here, and the ice fields here. Okay, so we're going to zigzag down the country as we head through there. And basically the focus of our talk today is going to be looking at museums and cultural sites that we visited throughout our time in Argentina. And perhaps maybe if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the culture of Argentina, maybe I'll do a series at the library for that talk as well. But today our focus is going to be on museums. All right, so the trip. There was a few things that made our trip pretty unique. And one of them was that we were traveling as a family, okay? So my wife Kelly on the side, there's me, and the two kids, Emery and Eli. And this is just before our departure to go off on our adventure. And one of our big concerns as we were heading out was going to be security. All right, when you're traveling with your kids, you're always worried about, you know, who's where and who's doing what. But they were really good travel companions. And once they got the hold of, okay, you move places every few nights, you go out on your adventures, they were really into it and really great travelers. A couple other things that made things unique. We were traveling in the wintertime. So it's off-season down in Argentina. And, you know, a lot of facilities weren't obviously expecting peak traffic. And a lot of places that we went to, we had the places to ourselves, which was great. And another thing was what's in Kelly's right hand in this picture, hockey sticks, and that giant bag down on the bottom. These things plagued us the whole way throughout Argentina. And they're full of hockey equipment, and it was a real pain. Kelly enjoyed the security of having some hockey sticks when she was standing at bus stops and things like that. Otherwise, I groaned about them the whole way along. We were traveling fairly light, with exception of the hockey equipment. The stuff in the boys' backpacks, pretty much toys and expendable items. Yeah, the rest of our clothes and all of our necessities in those 3 duffel-type bags. Well, what would Speaker Series be without a chart or graph? So I made this chart. And it is my perceived influences on Argentine museums. So this is based on no data whatsoever. I'll watch a few of you squirm in your seats about that for a moment. But these are really important factors for life in Argentina, not only on how they influence museums, but how they influence the people of Argentina. And one of the biggest influencers, which is, I mean, obviously a big topic all around the world, is the economy. And in Argentina, this is probably even more so amplified. In the early 2000s, Argentina defaulted on some debt, and they've been really working hard to sort of build themselves back up after that. And inflation's really high in Argentina, so it's difficult for people to sort of make ends meet. The peso isn't very strong. And so people are pursuing American dollars, and they like to keep American dollars close by because it's a more stable currency. So some interesting stories on that a little bit later on. But obviously a huge influencer on the people of Argentina. If they don't have that extra money, they're probably not going to these historical, cultural sites to spend their extra money. And that affects you know, how museums are functioning and operating. The next, in at 30% of perceived influence, is politics. And I mean, perhaps this is in play everywhere, but again, in Argentina, it's somewhat amplified. The people in Argentina are very, very passionate about their politics and their ways of life. And we saw this in action several times. They love to protest in Argentina. So they're very involved in the political process, and hats off to them for that. And then finally, another influence is CONICET. And CONICET is the national body for science. And I, from my limited knowledge of this organization, think that it was a really good influence on Argentine museums. So from my outsider's perspective, they really do a good job of supporting researchers to be able to do their science. So now we begin our journey. So we're going to begin from Buenos Aires and journey throughout the country down south. Buenos Aires is huge. So there's 12 million people there of the 36 million people that live in the entire country. So it's about a third of the population. It's big, it's busy, and it's loud. And for the first few days, that noise is just everywhere. You can't really escape it, and you're not quite used to it yet. So a pretty chaotic place. This is a picture of the obelisk, and it is on one of the biggest avenues in the world. There's 7 lanes of traffic going each way on this avenue, and then there's 2 service roads on either side of it. So it's a really big and busy place. There's a couple hundred people in this photograph, but you can't see them. And actually behind that yellow truck, there's a protest going on. All right? So that gives you a little bit of a picture of sort of what Buenos Aires is like. The architecture is beautiful in Buenos Aires. Tons of glass and rock and brass and beautiful artwork. You might fall in a giant crater on the sidewalk in front of the big, beautiful buildings, but the buildings themselves were really beautiful. It was a little bit intimidating to come into Buenos Aires for our first days in a new country, but we were brave. We ventured out. We rode the train, and we made it out to a couple of museums. And our first museum experience was the Natural History Museum. And you can see Emery standing under the sign right there. And also, if you look closely in this picture, you can see a little bit of graffiti sort of right under the sauropod dinosaur there. Graffiti is everywhere in Argentina. It's an epidemic. They just sort of seem to go on ignoring their lives with graffiti, but it really is. It's everywhere. Some of it's beautiful, most of it's not. Pardon me. So the Natural History Museum, here's an example of the architecture on the outside of the Natural History Museum. It was a really big, beautiful old building. And lots of the work that they did inside was really good as well. They had a really good mammals section, a really excellent birds section, marine life area. They were all really quite well done. Unfortunately, the area that needed the most work was the paleontology section. It was sort of this big dark hall, and they had some amazing specimens within the big dark hall, but they weren't very well lit, and lots of the interpretation was somewhat ad hoc. So there were areas where they had, photos and stuff taped to pieces of board for you to check out. But it was a pretty lively and happening place. They had lots of school groups in there. They had a dig pit, and lots of great things going on. But oftentimes you would see, like the case on the right-hand side there weren't any specimens in it. There was a random piece of paper hanging out in the bottom of it. And, just sort of some labels floating there with no real information about what these guys were and how they fit in. But that was kind of our first museum experience within Argentina. And, for the 20 pesos that it was, I would say it was probably well worth the money. Another site that we visited was the zoo in Buenos Aires. And again, it's a pretty urban place. You can see sort of above the elephant pen, you can see there's condos that overlook that property there. And one of the things that was most striking to me about the zoo in Buenos Aires was the enclosures for the animals. You can see that the elephants are enjoying this beautiful temple-like building as their home, which was really great. I'm not sure how practical it was for an elephant to live in a place like this, but it sure was beautiful to look at. And then there were some other animals that didn't enjoy beautiful temple-like homes. They got the chain-link fence with some holes in it so that people could maybe reach through and pet them and touch them or feed them or whatever. And on that note, public safety isn't really big in Argentina. And basically you're on your own. If you want to reach your hand through that fence, good luck, either with the animal or with the resulting scratches from the fence. If you're a buffalo in Buenos Aires, it's probably a really tough go in the crushing heat of the summertime. But in the wintertime, they have a chute for you, and the kids slide food down there, and it was really great, both for the buffalo and for the kids. They really enjoyed it. The interpretation was quite well done at the Buenos Aires Zoo. It was consistent throughout. It was brand new and it was shiny. And what I really liked about it was that they had a picture of all of the animals, because there's nothing more frustrating than going to a zoo and looking for the animal that you can't find in there and not exactly knowing what you're looking for. And I expect that the sponsorship had something to do with their really nice interpretation. Another site that we visited was the Recoleta Science Center, and we happened to hit here on a holiday. We didn't know it was a holiday, but there's actually about 20 days of holidays in Argentina, and if those holidays land sort of midweek, they have what they call bridge days. So there's a lot of holidays in Argentina. So if it's a holiday on a Wednesday, you probably don't expect to see people at work Monday or Tuesday. So when we hit this place, it was pretty busy. This was probably the most floor space that we saw in the whole area right there. And so their whole thing was, you're prohibited not to not touch. So please touch, all right? So really hands-on, really science-centery type of stuff. And really simple as well. You know, working with pulleys, working with gravity, working with Diego Maradona, the Argentine soccer legend, all right? So the boys had a really great time here, as well as the adults. And I just have to tell that Kelly just about electrocuted herself with one of the interactives. You were supposed to put one little piece of metal in there and then sort of watch it complete the circuit. And Kelly piled a whole bunch in there and jumped and screamed, much to my entertainment. I also picked up a couple of tips at this place should we want to save a little bit of work with redesigning text panels and things like that. And you can see the picture on the right. Just put a little bit of tape over top of the words if you're rethinking your text panels. The picture on the left, en remodelación, you can guess what that means. There was a lot of those around in several museums as well. Exiting Buenos Aires was a little bit tricky for us. We were caught up in yet another protest. There was a bus driver's strike, and the bus drivers weren't driving. Obviously, we're not going to rent a car in a city of 12 million people that drive completely crazy, so we needed to wait for the bus driver's strike to end before we could exit Buenos Aires. Well, we stayed around for a couple of extra nights, and then the day that we were supposed to depart, we were late for the bus, and literally we had to run through the bus station to flag it down. But once we got on that bus, everything was good. We rode the 14 hours out to Neuquén. And Neuquén is kind of a hub for paleontology, very rich in oil and gas. And the picture on the left is a picture of what a lot of the landscape looked like as we drove through Argentina. Most of Patagonia, low-lying shrubs, maybe a few outcrops with some nice pink rocks and things like that in it. But for the most part, lots and lots of this flying by the window. Definitely worth the trip, though. As we rented a car to go out to these sites, we went to a place called Museo Ernesto Bachman. And it was a pretty small museum maybe it was a big museum in a small town. The town itself was built by the men that were there to build a dam. And so it was sort of like a military-type ghost town. It was a little bit weird and very quiet when we were there. But we had the place all to ourselves. It was a difficult camera day at Museo Ernesto Bachman, but the specimens there definitely didn't disappoint. You can see Giganotosaurus on the right-hand side there, and Carnotaurus on the left-hand side there as well. And this was just one of probably half a dozen pretty impressive dioramas that they had there. They also had one of Giganotosaurus that was sort of in situ that you could walk up on a platform around and take a look at. And they were trying to create that Jurassic Park feel there. And they had a little dune buggy that was off to the side that had some lights that would flash off and on it. Cheesy, but good. The next site that we were to visit is Museo Carmen Fuentes, and again, another big oil and gas town. And as you come into town, you're greeted by this giant sauropod dinosaur. And it was made of oil field scrap metal, and it was a bunch of tetanus shots waiting to happen. But it was really cool to see, so we kicked around there for a while checking things out before we went to Museo Carmen Fuentes. And Museo Carmen Fuentes encompasses a whole bunch of different types of museum specimens. But this is where Rodolfo Coria, who's visited us here several times and worked with several of our scientists, is based out of. And although we didn't get to meet up with Rodolfo, he was also caught up in the bus driver protest and had to jig his schedule a little bit. We were caught up. We did catch up with another one of the researchers, Ariana, and she took us around to the collections as well as the preparations area, which contained a lot of really great specimens, although they weren't much more than rooms with shelves in them or rooms with desks where they were preparing specimens. The specimens themselves were incredibly impressive. Several of them being new specimens that we weren't allowed to take photographs of. But the big star of the show at Museo Carmen Fuentes is, as probably most of you know from last week's talk, Argentinosaurus. And Argentinosaurus was really, really impressive. Although we'd seen pictures of it online, we weren't really prepared for how big this specimen actually was. And there's a lot of other different specimens in the same room and a lot of interpretation in that room. And you just kept turning around back to Argentinosaurus. And Kelly and I just kept saying, wow, that's really huge. And then you'd go on to something else, but you just couldn't get away from Argentinosaurus. It really dominated the room and really was an impressive specimen. So there's a couple of 3-foot children down there for scale. And yeah, if you ever get the chance to visit Museo Carmen Fuentes, very, very impressive stuff. From there, we made our way west toward the Andes into Bariloche. And Bariloche is sort of billed as the Banff of Argentina, and you can see why. It was a really beautiful place, a lot of tourist activities to happen there. Our primary objective there was to go to Spanish school, where they spoke nothing but Spanish to us, and we were to respond in nothing but Spanish. They were very patient people. We were fortunate enough to meet up with Tamara, and Tamara has a connection to Drumheller. She worked for the Digby's at Science Camp in East Cooley, and Tamara now lives in Bariloche. And so not only did she take us on a lot of really good adventures around the countryside, she welcomed us into their guest accommodations, and it was a really fantastic stay. Tamara's a bit of a rock hound, really likes fossils, so she took us out on these adventures. On the left-hand side, you can see that we're collecting some geodes in the mountains, and so you would just walk along and look for rocks that had sort of a glassy look to them, and pick them up and collect them. We took them back to Tamara's place and cut them open and viewed the crystals inside. It was really cool. And she also took us to an estancia of the round rocks. And basically it was a hillside that just had these giant round rocks on them, and they were perfectly round. Most of them were pretty big, so, like the one that Emery's standing on, but some of them were maybe 10-pin bowling ball size. But what was amazing about them is that they were all perfectly round, and they were only just on this one hillside. As you looked around from there, there was no other ones there. Probably volcanic in origin, but nobody really knows too much about that stuff, and I know that Tamara's done a little bit of work to sort of uncover some of the secrets of the round rocks. Another place that we were fortunate enough to visit, because we had a local contact from Tamara, was a local museum where these two gentlemen, father and son, had a great collection of rocks and gems and fossils. And they also have a connection back to Drumheller. Rodolfo, the older one, the father, actually came to visit the museum on an invite from Don Brinkman and studied our museum. And when he went back, they built a preparation lab that you could look through and watch them prepare their fossils. And the first thing I saw when I walked into this museum, it was hanging down onto the left-hand side, was Royal Tyrrell Museum letterhead. And it was a note from Don, thanks for the visit, or you're welcome to come for a visit, or I forget what the content was. I should have snapped a picture of it, but it's this man's pride and joy to have this posted in his museum. We also went on a giant cave adventure while we were in Bariloche, and I looked terrified, but it was really quite a bit of fun. From Bariloche, we were going to make our way back over to the Atlantic coast, where we were going to start our work at Museo Egidio Feruglio. So instead of riding the bus, as was our usual mode of transportation, we thought, okay, let's take the train. There's a rickety old locals train that goes across the countryside. We thought it would be a cool experience. So we bought our tickets the week before, and we showed up the day of departure. And we got there, and guess who's on strike but the train drivers? Well, eventually we caught a bus, made our way across the country, and we stayed in this small town just outside of Tyrrell, and it was called Guyman. And there wasn't really too much in this town, but there was a little anthropological museum that we thought we'd better go visit. So there was two ways to get to the museum. You could go either through the train tunnel there, or you could walk over the hill and get to the museum. We went to the tourist office, and they said, yeah, you can go through the train tunnel. It's great. You know, maybe take a flashlight if you want. Sounded pretty easy. So armed with our little flashlight and a cell phone for some light, we thought we'd venture off into the tunnel. And we got in. We were feeling pretty good about it. Stopped and posed for a picture. Excited to go through the rest of the way of the tunnel. It was 300 meters long, and there was a little bit of a curve in this tunnel. And about 75 meters into the tunnel, the blackness just gobbled everything up. Suddenly our flashlights were useless, and the hand that I was holding was starting to tremble a little bit. There was one hand with a flashlight, and it was just all over the place, right? And there was some little jut-outs in the side, and I could feel a little bit of apprehension in the air. And I was thinking, this might be our last adventure in Argentina right here. What kind of father takes their family into a dark tunnel? I thought for sure it was going to be the end of us, but we all knew that it was shorter to get out the other end than to go back where we had come from. And so we braved it, and we actually made it through the other side. I make light of it, but it was really scary. Finally, we arrive at Museo Egidio Feruglio, and this is where I was doing some work and worked there for a month with the people of MEF for short. And it really felt a lot like home. If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, these guys love us. So you go into MEF, and the layout is fairly similar to our lobby. Auditorium is off to your left, cafeteria is off to the right, head to the galleries in there. And, you know, at first it didn't really strike me too much, whatever, standard museum. But then I went in and I started going through the galleries in the timeline, and I thought, you know what, this place looks a lot like the Tyrrell Museum. The place is about 15 years old, and as they were researching to build that place, of course, they paid us a visit. So a lot of the things that we saw at MEF were very similar to what we have here. There's a lot of exciting things happening at Museo Egidio Feruglio. They've got a great research program, lots of researchers, and lots of different specimens that they're dragging in all the time. And my work there involved taking a look at their existing galleries, looking at some opportunities for further gallery experiences in the area, as well as looking at opportunity for expansion of the building. Because much like us, they're kind of bursting at the seams with a lot of their collection stuff, as well as a lot of their work areas and things like that. So they're looking at opportunities to expand. This is the biggest and nicest building in the city of Tyrrell. It's located in a central location, very prominent in all of the literature for tourism and things like that. And they actually have an empty lot right beside them. So they're looking to take advantage of some of that and do some expansion into that area. So some pretty exciting times at Museo Egidio Feruglio. Lots of their exhibits are really fantastic. This is probably one of their main feature attractions. You can see Carnotaurus on the left again, some random sauropod in the middle, and then there's an Amargasaurus kind of in the foreground there. And this would be typical of lots of their exhibit pieces. Another little sampling of some of their exhibit stuff. I thought it was fairly clever. They didn't have a full Argentinosaurus or room for it, so they painted the outline of him on the wall and put a few of the pieces of the animal up there. And although it might not give you a length or anything like that, it gives a feeling for just how big the beast was. And what was really interesting was these pieces were just hung on the wall, and you could walk up and pick them off and, you know, walk around with them. And I thought, wow, those would get stolen really quickly at our place, but apparently things are a little bit different in Argentina. And in their lobby, they have a great specimen, and because they have nowhere else to put it, they decided to put it in the middle of their garden in the lobby, and that's a Titanosaurus. So a really cool specimen that really grabs attention as you first go into Museo Egidio Feruglio. They also have a version of Dinosaur Provincial Park. This is Geopark Bryn Gwyn, and this is where lots of the research has taken place in the past. And we were fortunate enough to go out there for a day and be able to tootle around with Pedro, one of the outreach specialists. And it was the windiest day ever. Well, every day is the windiest day ever in Argentina, but this is one of them. Some of the strengths of Museo Egidio Feruglio, like I said, they have lots of researchers. And this is one of their researchers, Ignacio Escapia. And he's a fairly young up-and-comer, and I spent quite a bit of time with Nacho as I was there. And I mentioned Conicet earlier as sort of one of the influences on the museum scene. And one of the things that I learned about Conicet is that once you're a researcher in Argentina, you can then choose where you want to go to do your research. And so Conicet pays you to go wherever. And that's why Museo Egidio Feruglio had 13 researchers there while I was there. So a lot of researchers, a lot of specimens coming in, and a lot of really exciting stuff going on. Unfortunately, what they don't have is a lot of support staff for development and things like that, of galleries, of maintenance, and the sort. So my work was quite welcome there as, you know, to make outside observations of areas that they could improve on. And the picture on your right is one of the exciting specimens. It's kind of a grainy picture. I snapped it through the prep lab window, which looks alarmingly like our prep lab window. And that's a femur of a brand new sauropod dinosaur, and it's just about 2 meters long. So it's set to be one of the largest dinosaurs in the world, and they have 2 of this dinosaur in one locality. So some really exciting stuff, and probably a need for expansion if you're digging up the world's largest dinosaur. After all of our work in Tyrrell at MEF, it was time for a vacation, so we headed back north up to the peninsula. And the big thing in this area was the whales and whale watching. And so we went to a really great museum called the Eco Center. Here's a skeletal specimen outside. The monitors over on the right-hand side there, you could watch all sorts of marine life swim past the windows. So it was a cheap and effective way to bring the ocean into that museum. They did a really good job at this museum of using local materials and materials that sort of added to the authenticity, that maritime feel. You can see the boards in that picture. You know, from some old dock or something like that. As well, they used lots of old ship steel and things like that. And one of my favorite parts of this museum or eco center was that you could go up into this lighthouse sort of area and just sit and look out at the ocean and read books and sort of hang out. It was a really tranquil spot. Kids decided we didn't need to do that, though. From there, we ventured out into the peninsula and did some whale watching, which was really fantastic. And I've got thousands of pictures of roiling water if you'd like to come look. I purchased this picture here, though, so that you guys would know some of what we saw. Besides the whale watching, it was really relaxing. We did a lot of beach combing, a lot of kite flying, which is a great activity if you ever go to Patagonia. From there, we continued our venture south down to Sarmiento, where we had heard about a petrified forest while we were working at MEF. And this was really a good example of sort of grassroots work to promote tourism and museums in a fairly small agricultural town. And the petrified forest itself has a couple new buildings out there that were built up by volunteer board and a few members doing fundraising and things like that. And I don't know if it was because our host that we stayed at was one of the business people that was doing all this promotion, but we really got to feel that, you know, these people were really doing some great work in order to promote the area as well as preserve and protect their resources. So this is the building where the guy lives to work at the park, and as well there's a matching building that was a little bit of an interpretive facility that you could go in and check out some videos as well as some of the specimens that they got from the park. And the big highlight was just walking around and looking at all the petrified wood. And good thing the pieces were nice and big like that so you could hold on to them so that the wind didn't sweep you right out of the park. Some really beautiful scenery in this area, and it didn't look too much unlike Dinosaur Provincial Park, that's for sure. Really, really majestic, really quite beautiful. And of course they had some interpretation, and what was great about their interpretation was for the gringo that didn't know too much Spanish, they did it in both Spanish and English, which on occasion happened in Argentina, but it definitely wasn't a given. So it was a good way to really practice your Spanish when you could come across interpretive signage like that. Also in the same town they had the I don't know, I guess the Calgary Zoo's solution to dinosaurs, and it was basically a city block that they had fenced off, and they had recreated probably at least 20 dinosaurs in that area, and so it was really beautiful to go visit the park that day. That day we didn't get blown away, and it was sunny blue skies. And they also had a small little museum there that was pretty typical of some of the architecture that you would see down in Patagonia, mostly bomb-proof stuff that couldn't get blown away. From Sarmiento, we journeyed even further south, and we wanted to go to this place that was quite a bit out of the way. And it's, again, another small agricultural town called Perito Moreno. And you have to be careful in Argentina because there's a town called Perito Moreno, there's a glacier called Perito Moreno, and there's a national park called Perito Moreno. If you mean to end up in the town of Perito Moreno, that's great. But if you're not expecting to end up in the town of Perito Moreno, it's probably the biggest disappointment ever. But the main reason that people come to this area is to visit Cueva de los Manos. And Cueva de los Manos is a World Heritage Site that has a lot of cave paintings on it. And again, it's still a couple hours outside of Perito Moreno, but definitely well worth the drive. The canyon itself is huge and majestic. And the rock art, or even though it's called Cueva de los Manos, isn't really much of a cave. It's mostly kind of an overhang, perhaps with some deeper depressions in it. And the rock art there is 10,000 years old, but it looks like it was just painted on a couple of days ago. So what the natives would do is they would gather different pigments from the rocks in the surrounding areas and crush it up with animal fats and whatever their secret formula was. And they would take bird bones, and because the bird bones are hollow, they would use them like a straw, put their hands up on the wall, and then put the paint in their mouth and blow the pigments through the straw and onto the wall. And there's over 800 handprints at this site. It really was truly impressive. There's a few other little drawings and things like that, but it's amazing just the quantity and the quality of the paintings that you see, as well as in some instances how high they actually got up to put their handprint on there. If you don't want to make it all the way to Perito Moreno, Drumheller has a version, and this is parked just up from the Aquaplex. From Perito Moreno, we made our way down to El Calafate, and this is the home of the Perito Moreno Glacier. And again, it's fairly remote, so we rented a car and journeyed out to the glacier. And this is probably one of the most well-developed tourist spots in Patagonia. A huge series of walkways takes you down, and there's huge viewing platforms where hundreds of people can stand, or there's sort of little nooks where you can go and just have some private time and watch the glacier. And what's amazing about this glacier is that it's still advancing. So you can sit there and watch pieces of ice calve off the end of it. And I don't know with what frequency it was going that day, but we probably saw 8 or 10 really good crashes of ice, you know, in an hour or two. Really impressive. You would hear the glacier sort of creak and groan a little bit, and then you'd hear sort of like a crack of thunder. And you'd look and you could see it happening in slow motion. These pieces of ice would be coming off, and they would crash into the water. And then a second later, you would hear that crash, and then giant waves of water would spill out. And then even a couple seconds later, it seemed like you would see the piece of ice float back up to the surface of the water. It was really, really impressive. That ice face is 70 meters tall, so we're talking just a huge scale. And it was really difficult to sort of place how massive this piece was. Very impressive, though. Kelly bills this as the best day of 2013, and I'm pretty sure if we had the choice, we would have just sat there all day long. There's also a museum in El Calafate, about 5 kilometers outside of the city, and it was a brand new facility and a very impressive facility as well. And it really gave a lot of information about glaciers as well as a bunch of the local history. It was one of those very dark museums where everything was backlit, so no photography was allowed, but it was really cool because it was immersed right in the landscape there. It was really quite impressive, the views from there as well. From El Calafate, we made our way to our first journey outside of Argentina, where we went to Chile. And our primary objective in Chile was to play some hockey. And play hockey we did. It was a really big deal. The Chileans have been playing hockey for about 1.5 years on ice, and they have this cool little rink that's inside of a shopping mall, and it's just 3-on-3. And so I went down there and hooked up with an international team, and we played some hockey against a Chilean team as well as an Argentinian team, and it was a really big deal. The media was there. There was 600, 700, 800 people attending the games. Even though they didn't know exactly when to cheer, they liked it when we scored goals. They liked it when people fell. And I got to make an appearance on Chilean TV, so it was really cool. Did one of the first games of the series, and then went out for a couple of beers with the guys, and came home and got to watch myself play hockey on TV. So it was kind of fun. That will probably be the first and the last time. In Chile, though, we also visited some really cool sites. On the left, you can see this is the graveyard in Punta Arena, the city that we were in, and much like the famous graveyard in Recoleta in Buenos Aires, they have these giant temples here, and whole families are buried in these, I don't know, little miniature mosques, I guess, and it was really extravagant. If you couldn't afford a big building like this, there was also apartments that, you know, they'd sort of shove you into a drawer, but you were still on public display. It was interesting. We also went to a site where they were rebuilding ships that were significant to the area, including Magellan's ship. And you could go and climb around on all of these ships and pull the ropes and do whatever as you pleased. It was really cool. And they were also recreating another ship while we were there. Dennis Brayman, this is for you. The Beagle. So they were just in progress building this ship as we were there. So we got to stop and watch the laborers do their work. Finally, one of our last stops on the trip was in Ushuaia. And Ushuaia is the end of the world, el fin del mundo. And this is where the ships leave to go to Antarctica to do lots of their research and work down there. But Ushuaia was founded because that's where they sent prisoners. And they sent the prisoners down to build the jail, and then they put them in the jail. So they had a really cool museum in the old jail, and it covered just about everything. But a lot of it was, you know, just history of the area, history of the prisoners. And they also not only made the prisoners build the jail, but they made them build a train line so that they could go out into the forest so that they could collect all the wood to build said jail. And so you could still take a ride on this train trip and head out into the woods. And there was stories going over the speakers and stuff like that, telling you about what you were seeing. it was a really neat trip. And again in Ushuaia, we were playing a little bit of hockey. This time we weren't playing 3-on-3. This time it was time for the big ice, and we were playing on Olympic-sized ice facility. But you can see it's perhaps one of the nicest rinks in the world. The ocean is just over off onto the other side, and big majestic peaks in the background. And because the Argentines that were hosting the tournament didn't like the Chileans, we always got the sunrise game. Because they wanted us to play early in the morning, perhaps, I don't know. But it really was beautiful to play a little bit of hockey and watch the sunrise. Competition was a little bit stiffer in Argentina, as I was playing on the Chilean team. We didn't pull out a ton of victories, but it really was an amazing experience to be able to play hockey outdoors beside the ocean in the mountains in South America. From Ushuaia, we basically made our way back to Buenos Aires and flew back to Canada. And that was really about the conclusion of our trip. So while I maybe have alluded to a few things about some of the culture of Argentina, this is just sort of scraping the surface of things we did and places we went for our trip. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing about a few of them. Just before I wrap up, though, I'd like to say thank you to the Cooperating Society who supported our trip, supported our time at Museo Egidio Feruglio, as well as thank you to all of you, because without a lot of the support that we garnered from around here, Argentina definitely wouldn't have happened. From people that were working on projects, to people that gave advice, to contacts, to encouragement, to rides to the airport and looking after houses. Thank you. It's just a great community to have with you guys, and it feels really good to be home. So thank you.